Good evening and welcome. I'd like to call the October 19th meeting of the City of Issaquah's Development Commission to order at 7 p.m. As a reminder, we do still have a remote aspect to our meetings. This means both staff and members of the public may be participating in the meeting remotely via WebEx. Tonight we have two commissioners with excused absences, Commissioner Shore and Commissioner Ikeda, and our alternate commissioner, Commissioner Morgan, will be serving as a regular member tonight. At tonight's meeting, we have one discussion item and two action items. We'll be receiving an update on the Title 18 Amendment Project, discussing the Title 18 Review Level Thresholds Draft Code, and considering changes to our Development Commission rules and regulations. Our first item is to take action on meeting minutes for the August 17th meeting provided in the agenda packet. I hope everybody's had a chance to look them over. Are there any corrections to the August 17th minutes in the packet? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Next, I'd like to open the floor for any members of the public, in person or virtually, who'd like to make general comments. There is no public hearing this evening, so this is the opportunity to provide comment on any item, whether general or associated with our regular business items on the agenda tonight. Those who are in person to make comments will be called on first, and I will ask for other speakers before closing this portion of the meeting. If you're joining us by computer or smartphone via WebEx and would like to make a comment, please raise your virtual hand. This varies by device. One option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right corner. It may also be located under the reactions menu or the more menu. If you're on the phone and not a computer, press *3 on your phone. For those making comments, please direct your comments to the Development Commission and not to individuals. For in-person attendees, please step up to the lectern. For meeting attendees participating virtually, when you're recognized, please unmute your microphone. When it's your turn to speak, state your name, speak clearly, and especially if you're attending virtually, pause frequently and limit your comments to 5 minutes. If you're attending virtually and don't respond after your name or phone number is called, or if your connection is lost, the meeting will need to proceed. You're encouraged to rejoin the meeting if you're able to do so. So, Mr. Aldrich, has anyone signed up to make general comments this evening?
One person has signed up to make comments.
Is the person in the room?
Yes.
Okay, please approach the lectern and make your comments.
I learned to turn it on. Then I forget to turn it off and I have to run up and turn it off again every time. My name's Connie Marsh. I live on Squawk, and I want to talk about the thresholds. So I agree with the city that the number 4 threshold is the best, but I do have some questions. I don't know what with comment means exactly, just like I didn't understand what without comment meant. Is that even if you have a 12-foot something, you have to send out a notice? I'm not clear. So I think it can be 10,000, but I don't know if it needs to go all the way down to 0 because I don't understand what it entails. Now, the Development Commission is the set of educated eyes that the city needs as we redevelop. And so my concerns with what I think you should be able to look at are getting to be a little bit different with this draft code. What I think we need to start doing is have you review more about how the construction in tighter and tighter areas is going to interface with the community. So we have had some very severe impact examples. Vail, Atlas nearly put the community out of business in those areas because they were just barricaded for years at a time. And we have other things like road closures for years at a time in this city. And I think that you should be able to, because of construction, sorry, that was, and I'm gonna name it, Costco, right? We have not been able to use daytime streets for years because of a construction project. And I think that you should be the eyes on the community values for us being able to use our own city. I don't think that that is on your current plate for what they're providing. And so I would ask for you to ask about those two things. What is comment? And can we more closely review the impacts of construction and maybe put conditions on those? Right? Thank you very much. Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Eldridge. Is there anyone else who signed up online to speak?
There is no one else in room or online that has indicated that they would like to speak.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to close the public comment portion of the meeting now and move on to our first regular agenda item, which is Title 18 General Provisions and Procedures. The purpose of this first agenda item is to provide the Development Commission an informational update on the Title 18 Code Amendment Project. The order of operation for the item will be staff presentation and then questions by the Development Commission. So we will move on to staff presentation. Director Dolly Wall, please go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, good evening, Commissioners. It's great to meet in person, even though it's not a very pleasant environment outside with the air quality significantly taking a turn. So appreciate everyone taking the time to come down here. And more importantly, the Title 18, the amount of time you all have spent reading through the code, participating with the Planning and Policy Commission. And I know Planning Policy Commission in multiple meetings has been really thankful for all your time and input, and they really value your input. Since your participation in a few projects, I think you know we divided this whole Title 18 into 6 different topic areas. You all participated in a few, but there was natural environment that we had joint meetings with Environmental Board and PPC, and Landscape and Open Space with the Parks Board, participating with PPC, and then you all did the zoning and uses, the building and design and development standards piece. And then PPC looked at all the miscellaneous. There were a bunch of other miscellaneous topics and process and procedures. So we've finished all 6 public hearings on all 6 of those subtopics with the joint boards and PPC, and taken public feedback and input on those. And then we've gone to the council committee. So this year, council started a committee structure where it's they've divided different topics, and so there's a committee formed, Planning, Development, and Environment Committee. So it's made up of 3 council members, and we've gone to them with the plan after each of these 6 topic areas. So, you know, informing them of the summary of discussion, taking some additional policy guidance from them on some of the topics that you all said, here we need more information. And so we've circled through the first round, and we're working on releasing a consolidated draft. So we're tentatively targeting that soon. In the interim, we're working on a SEPA determination for the code updates, and as well as testing of the draft code. So the way the testing is structured at the moment, we had a call for testers, and I think you all received the email. We got a good response to that. We ended up having 6 subtopic areas that we thought would be good to test. And those were a single home, family home renovation that has a wetland nearby, a business remodel in Old Town, a multifamily mixed-use development in Central Issaquah, commercial development outside of Central Issaquah, and then something near the shoreline, so, you know, to test the shoreline master program, and then development on a forested hillside. So those were the main topics that we had kind of touched in this code update. So we're working with the 7 officially, you know, folks that have that submitted that they were interested in these 7 topics, and working with them on selecting a site, getting owner authorization, and then having a conceptual layout. And staff's going to meet with them a few times to develop and help them navigate the code, and then lessons learned from that exercise will then get folded into the final consolidated draft that we will hold public hearings on. So we're still hoping that we would have all of this kind of touch points with Planning and Policy Commission by the end of this year, and put the consolidated draft in front of a council committee soon thereafter. So that's what we've been working on, but appreciate all the input. And if you want to have a meeting on, you had a particular topic that you were interested in, we're happy to kind of meet with you one-on-one, or, walk you through some of those nuances in the code. But that's all I have in terms of our update.
Thank you, Director. So, Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments on the general code update process? Okay, thank you. Moving on to our second agenda item tonight, review level threshold. The purpose of the second agenda item this evening is to discuss and provide some staff direction regarding the draft code for the process and procedures topic related to the level of review as part of the Title 18 update. The order of the operation for this item will be staff presentation, then Development Commission questions, and finally, Commission input. So we'll start off with the staff's presentation. Mr. Geitz, please go ahead with your presentation when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. It's great to be here in person, meeting you all for the first time tonight. I've got 4 quick slides to run through this evening, touching on one aspect that you've previously discussed before the Commission earlier in the update process, which was part of bucket number 6, the policies and procedures provisions. And I'll run through the purpose, some background, and then open up for questions and discussion at the end. So tonight we're seeking additional input or comments from the Commission based on the direction of the Planning, Development, and Economic Committee, the Council Committee that Director Dhaliwal mentioned. At their October 6th meeting, the Council Committee was interested in gaining a little further context from the Development Commission as it relates to the level of review thresholds and the proposed changes. Prior to the Council Committee making a final recommendation to City Council, they wanted to have a little more input from you all to make sure that they're on the right track. So as it stands under the current code, there are varying thresholds depending on use, location, and underlying zoning. It's a little bit all over the board depending on site location and those standards. The proposed draft is intending to consolidate that, the different code documents, and incorporate best practices, ensuring greater clarity for all, for developers, for staff, and for the community. So what we're seeking tonight is for any guidance or input that can be carried forward to the Council Committee related to these 2 questions before you: what size of building should be reviewed administratively versus before this Commission, and the kind of follow-up, which is connected there, is should we continue to use or omit the high visibility street threshold in that determination process. So for just a little bit of context, you'll find in the packet material some background information related to surrounding jurisdictions, some recent projects, and the other options that were up for consideration. Starting with peer jurisdictions, we found that there's various levels of threshold that initiate a Development Commission type of review, whether it's a Development Commission, Design Review Board, with some having all review occur administratively. That could be based on square footage, or it could be based on location within a city. And then the most recent projects that have come before the Commission, all but the Brown Bear Car Wash, which was on a high visibility street, were well above the threshold for the Development Commission. Sorry, let me go back real quick. So the current option being recommended by the Council Committee, or to the Council Committee, is option 4 in the packet. This drops the threshold down to 10,000 square feet from 45,000, aligning with the proposed SEPA threshold amendment that's currently in play. And this was the latest recommendation based on PPC feedback, and we are just looking for any additional guidance that you could provide. Finally, for reference, this is the high visibility street map that we currently have in place. Both PPC and Council Committee have recommended moving away from this map and treating all streets the same for this, due to this lower threshold that's being proposed. That's what I've got for you. Any questions?
Okay, I'm going to open the floor to questions from commissioners. Anyone have questions for staff?
I had a question.
Commissioner Price?
With respect to the technical documents now being administratively approved and reviewed, do I have that correct? So like stormwater reports, geotechnical reports, all of traffic reports, all of that stuff is now entirely administrative under option 4 or all options?
I believe those are under option 2. Is that?
Under all options. So I think what we heard from you all during our initial public policy guidance was where you bring value to the process was site design and building design, and then having geotechnical reports and storm water reports and those kind of things. From a developer's perspective, we couldn't give them an answer until the very end, if the project came in front of the Development Commission. So if someone had a wetland on their property and they said it was a type 3, we would have it peer reviewed, but it won't get approved. So they never had the surety from the city as to what to design for. So it addresses that concern of getting some of these pieces that really are reviewed under the technical earlier, so they'll all be reviewed administratively.
Perfect. Okay, that answers my question. Thank you. I just really wanted to understand that all options suggested they were administratively reviewed. Will we then still see those documents?
We're happy to kind of give you those at the tail end, or give you a checklist that complies with the stormwater manual and it complies. So we're looking for feedback how you'd like those kind of documents in your packet. I mean,
Right.
giving you a 6,000-page, agenda packet is also expecting a lot of
Yeah.
reading from you. So where you think you want to see and where you feel you're not going to, you're not interested, that would be good feedback for us too.
Exactly. Okay, thank you. That answers my question.
Other questions? Commissioner Brennan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On a related question on how that process works. So we'll have, for the site design, building architecture, et cetera, that would come in front of the commission. And the technical review, transportation, which we get a lot of public comments on, or have in the past on the larger projects. So the public, I worry about the public getting confused about where they can be heard or not when it comes now to the way this bifurcated process is going to work. So it's going to be important to make sure there's clarity for the public engagement and how that happens or not, depending upon whether it's administratively reviewed or in front of the commission. Otherwise, we'll have people lined up in front of the commission asking us to impose conditions or restrictions on a project, and it will be outside of our authority to do that, and so they'll get frustrated by that. So I think it's going to be an important part of how this gets laid out, particularly for the public,
Sure.
and when we separate these processes.
No, good feedback. The other thing I think was community was getting confused between, and it was becoming challenging for us when different types of early community engagement meetings, community collaboration, pre-application, environmental neighborhood meeting, sometimes we had you attend and sometimes you didn't have. So all of that is now called a community meeting. I think we can rename it to whatever. I think it's called pre-application community meeting for now. But you all won't be participating in that. It'll be more free-flowing conversation between the community members and staff to answer questions and the applicant to have that kind of feedback from them. So that'll be step 1. So we'll have a public notification when we deem it complete for the projects that trigger the community meeting. Early community meeting, we'll have that. And this interim step of giving them, the applicant, some clear, yes, this looks good for stormwater because it meets our adopted manual or not. That decision-making, we have to figure out how that we will kind of capture that in writing that can be appealed if someone disagrees from the community. So all those administrative decisions, or one administrative decision will occur, then it'll be a public hearing, and then what'll be in front of you is the approval criteria. So I don't know if you can pull up the criteria on your screen. We did include the draft code in your packet. I don't know if anyone had a chance to look at that, but we can pull that up. So having that clarity on, from the community standpoint, this is what you'll be basing your decision on. If you have feedback on that criteria, you can provide tonight or later, you can email that to us as well.
Other questions?
Just one more follow-up. And so, just for clarity, so the final decision, so you'll have essentially final decision on the technical review done by staff, and that doesn't follow a separate appeal process. We would have to get through the final decision on the application by the Development Commission before it would be ripe for appeal then as a complete. So if somebody wanted to appeal it based on a transportation impact, for example, that appeal process would not begin until after the decision from the
We'll work
commission.
it out with the attorneys. I think that's the needle that we need to thread. The requirement to have only one open public meeting, hearing, that's our bound. So, again, I think the protections are so that people can't drag a project out and every time they get a chance to appeal. So there's that aspect of it. So,
Good.
yeah, good point. Of
Thank
how
you.
that appeal process will, and one open record public hearing requirement will be met.
Others? Commissioner Dillon?
I guess just following up on Commissioner Brennan's comment and the question of whether those approved materials would be included in our packet. It would be nice to have those. I feel like those provide context for us in terms of how the development is going to fit in with different aspects of the surrounding area. But if those have already been administratively approved, perhaps they're in an appendix section or something that we can refer to if we're interested in.
Do you need a summary or a conclusion of what it was designed based on this? So maybe.
If that's not something that creates a lot of extra staff work, having something like that in the portion of the packet that we're reviewing would be helpful, and then the full document available, whether it's through a link or as an appendix or whatever, would be nice. Moving back to the question of the size threshold that you were looking for us to address, and referring to Ms. Marsh's comments earlier, it seems like there previously or in the current code is a threshold at below 4,000 square feet, which would be a lot of single-family home renovations and things like that, that had the administrative review without comment, and then the next level was administrative review with comment. And so is that lower level proposed to just disappear if the threshold moves to 10,000 for Development Commission review?
At this point, PPC just wanted us to come back with more options. They didn't really make a decision on this like strongly a recommendation. They expressed some concerns with option A and B, so we only shared the first two options. We developed option 3 and 4 after their feedback. So, there isn't a strong one way or the other. I think they were just trying to figure out what's the right, by eliminating the high visibility streets, which were bumping up anything over 4,000 to a Development Commission review. But anything outside of those areas, the threshold was really high, 45,000. So there was, if you're one parcel away from a main street, you get a completely different threshold as opposed to when you're on the street. So there was some issues with related to that, and the difference was pretty high, 4,000 versus 45,000. But that's on our existing code. So when we had the conversation with them, we just presented the first two options, which were carrying forward the existing code, in the spirit. So 4,000 and 45,000 were what we were playing around with. But and then the other conversations, like Christian said, we've had with them is, do you want to raise the SEPA thresholds? Because right now, anything over 4,000 square feet goes through a SEPA review. A lot of our neighboring jurisdictions don't have that. The state law was changed over time. So I think on that one, mostly what we heard from PPC and the council committee was 10,000 square feet. You could go up to 30,000, but they felt like an entrance step for Issaquah would be a 10,000 square foot. And then getting buildings to meet LEED certification. There was a lot of discussion at the PPC level to tie it as an incentive. You don't have to go through SEPA if you do a LEED Platinum certified, for instance. The council committee's direction was it adds a layer of complexity. If we're going to require LEED certification, just require it for a certain size, and then have your SEPA threshold as a separate. But 10,000 for both of those was where they were headed. And so that led to our development of option 4, just to be consistent of what those, what mean. Some of the things that the committee was concerned about is, are the developers going to use this threshold to either stay under this threshold, so we'll get more of 9,000 square foot buildings than 10,000 because they don't want to go through a higher process. And also, so I think that can be handled through the regulatory language. And I think one of you commented at one stage, it's the cumulative square footage. So someone couldn't come in and say, 4,000 here, 4,000 here, and 4,000 here, and we're going to do it in 3 years and not go through a development commission review. That will capture it in a 3-year time period. It's a cumulative. So we can address those kind of concerns in the actual regulatory language that we can put in the code.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. So I guess I would be curious to know maybe what the distribution on these development permits that the city is receiving. 10,000 square feet sounds like a fairly good threshold, but if there are, 30 projects compared to 10 that are coming in over a given period of time, is having development commission review going to be a bottleneck? We have, 2 meetings, up to 2 meetings a month, and if we're seeing 2 or 3 times as many projects that are going to commission review, is that doesn't seem to be a desirable outcome in terms of moving those projects along.
Yeah, so if I understand your question correctly, are there 10,000 square foot buildings that are currently not coming to development commission, from 10,000 to 45,000 that will bring in more? A lot of areas are currently developed, so things that you see that have come to development commission are pretty high threshold anyways. And then like the car wash, which was only 2,500, came to you. So I think, we can look at the numbers, but anecdotally, I can tell you that it's not going to tip the needle where we will ask you to meet every week or anything like that. I think the workload would probably remain the same for development commission under the 10,000. I don't know if Christian has any more actual data.
A quick look through permits back to 2018. There were about 5 total that were above that threshold. Many of them were, series of multifamily buildings, so they're cumulatively much larger, and so you'd be looking at those one time instead of each 12,000 square foot multifamily building within a large complex. And that includes the middle school number 6. It includes Costco within that group. So large projects are typically what we'd be seeing, and then it drops off from there. So.
Other questions? Commissioner Morgan?
Thank you, Chair. Was there a consideration of a minimum lot area to consider too? Thinking of like a car wash, you might have a small structure on a large lot, perhaps for other kinds of uses like that. Unlikely in the central area, I think, but possible. So would it be possible to include something like that? So if you said, well, if it's either over 10,000 square feet or over a 40,000 square foot parcel, that would then, if it is a large parcel that would have an impact, that would come into play as well.
Sure. The existing code had a 3-acre threshold, and we felt that was way too big. You don't have that many 3-acre sites, so it seemed redundant. But we can put a combination of 4,000 and or just or, either or
one,
would trigger
yeah.
it, but what's the right size of the lot? 3 acres seemed, it wasn't clear where that came from in our code, and seemed that
Yeah,
would
'cause
never
it-
get triggered.
Because I would think if it's 10,000 as our minimum, a 40,000 square foot lot gets you to 25% coverage, which is like a car wash or something like that. So it seems like, I can't imagine going
about an
above
acre.
40,000.
About an acre.
Yeah, or an acre, yeah,
Yeah, 43,000, yeah.
560, yeah, so.
Other questions?
I had another question.
Commissioner Price?
Thank you, Chair. Are there other thresholds associated with the SEPA that we should be aware of? Is it literally just building square footage? Is environmentally sensitive areas, short plats, unit count, anything else that is associated with that that would also trigger our review?
Yeah, so SEPA thresholds are, how many residential units you're building. So currently, our standards are 4 units or more trigger a SEPA review. Under the state law, you can go up to, 30 or something, and 60 for multifamily. Where when we presented those options to PPC and then the council committee, we had a middle option, which was, I forget now, I think it was landing more like 10,000 square feet for commercial, which equates to about 10 residential units. So increasing it from 4 to 10, we presented the options of going all the way up to 30, 10, or 4, or keeping 4. And I think that's what the proposed draft will include. The consolidated draft would be the middle range. So 10 residential units or 10,000 square foot would be. And then SEPA also has other thresholds, cubic yards of grade and fill, or 40 parking stalls. So right now our threshold is, I think, 100 cubic yards. I think we're recommending at least 500 cubic yards. Because SEPA adds a process, but the outcome is still the same. I mean, it's the same codes that they have to comply with. And so trying to find that balance where SEPA is a tool to address cumulative impacts, and maybe that makes sense at a certain level, but that's why I think the state law was changed over a period of time, and those thresholds have gone up. But we haven't updated our code in some time. So there was good public comments on keeping the existing thresholds or not, and so that's where that debate was. But I don't know if I answered your question in terms of.
Well, you did, and but also, is our purview strictly limited to 10,000 square feet and above? That's what triggers our review. No other criteria. Say you have a combination of grading, fill, it's on a creek, it's on a steep slope.
Yeah.
It's 20 units, but, it's not 10,000 square feet, but has all the other triggers. Ours is strictly square footage based. Is that
Yeah, if you're
accurate?
adding square footage or building new,
Yeah.
that's what I think we're proposing. And what we're hearing is, if you're not adding a building, your example of maybe if there's a size of a parcel, but it's non-building and outdoor something that doesn't involve a structure with a square footage, then perhaps that 1 acre site may be inappropriate. Yeah, but there's not any other threshold. I think the current code has a 3 acre, 4,000 to 45,000 on a high visibility street. Those are the options that currently exist in the code. And then there are SEPA has its own thresholds. Shoreline has its own thresholds. It can be, is it normal maintenance or not? So state law is very clear about some of the other land use decisions. For you, you're the decision maker in a site development permit.
Right.
And so for site development permit, what are the projects that need to go through a site development permit?
Okay. And I think I'm realizing, as I ask this question, I'm asking a question that doesn't pertain. So, the SEPA is independent of that, but we're establishing thresholds which are consistent with the SEPA review, right? So,
Yeah.
okay.
So if a
I,
project is over, say, 12,000 square feet, it will require SEPA, it will require a site development permit approved by a development
Right,
commission. Yeah.
okay. I had to say that out loud to realize what I was saying. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Morgan?
I just keep following Commissioner Price because he makes comments that make me think about things. So the difference between the current regulation and what's in front of the commission versus what's proposed in the option that we're considering here, the 10,000 threshold, for example, and the question that Commissioner Morgan asked about the square footage of the property, or the 3-acre thresholds that you mentioned. So in this particular instance, if we added a property limit or threshold, would it trip plats and short plats, et cetera? Because we've seen plats in front of the commission before because they were large redevelopment or developing of undeveloped properties. So does this shift that's going on here really move us just into building and architectural review or site development and away from any potential for platting, short plat, PUDs, et cetera?
Yeah, so the preliminary plat application by itself is a hearing examiner process, currently in the code, and will stay that way. Maybe, I don't know about the existing code, but the final plat goes to the hearing examiner now. Under the proposed draft, the hearing examiner will decide the preliminary plat after a public hearing. The final plat, the state law was changed, because what happens at the final plat is just, did you build the road based on what you submitted as a preliminary plat and all that? It's a very technical review that those can be handled administratively. So that's what's in the proposed draft, as the preliminary plat as a hearing to the hearing examiner and final plat. Now, I think that you bring up a good point is, so that's, plat is just laying out the property lines. When they come in to build an attached townhome building, which is, more than 10,000 square feet, will that trigger a site development permit and will come in front of the Development Commission? We'll need to think about that, of how things with the plat interplay with the Development Commission site development permit.
Other questions? I have a few. You've already answered one, I'm sure, about the 3-acre size. In the context of an administrative process and decision, I'm going to pick up on the comment by a member of the public tonight. What are comments? How are they submitted? Is there any kind of hearing associated with that before you, or are those comments by email or mail, or how are they handled?
You're talking about public comments at what stage?
Administrative process only.
Okay, so, when we first get the application, we'll determine if it's complete. If it's complete, we'll send out a notification to the procedures section, change the notification requirement. So it's going to go to 500 feet property owners and tenants, and it increased from 300 to 500. There'll be a notice board posted on the site. It'll be published on the city's website and other things that are in the procedure. So that's when we'll notify early during the process, saying, here's a project, and if there's a community meeting scheduled, we'll probably include that in that community meeting, timeline, and hold it within that time period, and still have some time for folks to submit comments after that. So once we take all those public comments, that'll become part of the record, so we will work and address them through our review process. When things come to you all for the formal hearing, we can include all those public comments and potentially a response to what we, did with those public comments.
Okay, so the community meeting then is part of the administrative process?
Correct.
Great, okay, thanks. Is it desirable, I imagine it would be, for the square footage threshold to apply to both residential and commercial uses? That we had something in the code, didn't we, about 30,000 for commercial versus 45,000 otherwise? At some point we made that split. Did you want them to be consistent for both commercial and residential?
That's a good question. So our existing code actually has a lot of variation. So in the central Issaquah, it's the 4,000 and 45,000. The rest of the, replacement regulations refer to the central Issaquah regulations, but the rest of the city has a permitted uses table, and each use had a different threshold. So a grocery store had a 30,000 square foot. a lot of uses had no threshold. So a daycare that's, 4,000 versus 10,000, same process. So it was based on each use and what level of review. So instead of the permitted use table saying it's permitted or not permitted, it said what level of review was required. So it was based on use rather than what the building or the square footage was. So it was
Okay.
very complicated.
Yeah, we could see.
So
how-
we, in the proposed draft, we've taken that out and we've just had permitted or not permitted table, and then the thresholds of what triggers what is a separate piece.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And then just finally, is the option 2 that's provided here, that's the current central Issaquah threshold for us, right? But minus the 3-acre provision?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Those are the only questions I had. Any more questions, Commissioner Morgan?
One follow-up. With regard to the with comment, I was wondering if Ms. Marsh was referring to Table 18.20403 that's on page 31 that shows Level 1 is administrative without comment, Level 2 is administrative with comment. And I wondered if she wondered what the difference was between without comment and with comment.
Yeah, so you're right. I think that's the table that we have in the top with comment and without comment. And it was whether we will circulate it for public notice to 500 folk, property owners and tenants around it.
Okay, so that does refer to public comment, not
Yeah.
staff. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Dillon?
So I guess then, if it were changed to option 4, which was less than 10,000 feet, would all be with comment. So does that mean that if somebody's adding an accessory dwelling unit in their backyard, that it would be circulated out for public comment? It seems like there needs to be some low-level threshold that is still with the without comment administrative review.
Yeah, so it's a site development permit isn't triggered by someone building a
Okay,
house.
got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Any other questions?
I have a quick question.
Commissioner Gilbert?
So how would for example, a cottage development be treated with this? Would that go to design review at all?
Our code currently doesn't have an option for cottage housing, and so that's a discussion we're having. The city, we got a grant from Department of Commerce to study a housing action implementation. So one of the strategies is there to look at improving, or increasing housing diversity choices. So we have a consultant on board that's really looking at that piece, and so there'll be separate code amendments kind of talking about what a cottage housing, whether it's a condominium style of ownership or it's platting and things like that. So that's to come. It's not in this draft yet.
Others? Okay, so staff is asking for input from us tonight on the 2 big questions. Mr. Geitz, could you put up again? Do you have them available there? I'm going to read them if they're not handy. I think I'd like to take these together if there's no objection to that instead of separately, because I think they're somewhat interdependent, or could be. Okay, so here are 2 questions. And do we have any comments or discussion then on what input we want from staff? Commissioner Morgan?
Sure, thank you. I would agree with I like the idea of the 10,000 square foot matching the SEPA, because I think that makes it easier for developers, people with property to understand. I have to do a SEPA, I have to get a development commission review, or I don't for either of those. I like that idea of simplifying that. I would like to have a lot square footage, like an acre, at most that we would get involved in. And I don't think that would be very many parcels that would come up. As for the visibility, since we're down to 10,000 square feet, in general, I would agree with that. But goal 8, this is on, I think, page 17 of the package. Goal 8 was neighborhoods retain their charm and distinctive character, pattern, and setting that includes both built and natural environments. I think one of the differences for me with the square footage is the neighborhoods tend to have a different feel size-wise. And for a lot of downtown Issaquah, the central area where a lot of this would happen, 10,000 I think works just fine. If we're out if we're going East Lake Sammamish Parkway by Fred Meyer, I think 10,000 works fine. But I don't know that it works well in Old Town and in really downtown Issaquah, I'd call it. Because I think a lot of the charm and character of Issaquah is encapsulated in Old Town Issaquah. I would suggest just having a couple streets that we would include, which would be Front Street from perhaps Gilman down to Newport, and Sunset from I-90 to Newport. As those two streets, most of that is a much smaller character, where a 10,000 square foot building can appear to be a large building in those neighborhoods. So I would suggest that in those neighborhoods that we would drop down to perhaps the 4,000 square foot mark on those streets, where the visibility of a 4,000 square foot building is much more important than a 10,000 square foot building, say on Gilman or East Lake Sammamish Parkway.
Why not come down the line for comments, Commissioner Dillon?
I like Commissioner Morgan's idea. I didn't have any other new comments to add.
Commissioner Brennan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the 10,000 square foot threshold. I think that does make sense, the alignment with SEPA. I also like the simplification that it creates by applying a consistent standard across the city, just from an applicant's standpoint. You know, part of the struggle is trying to figure out what's the right level of review that's appropriate for development that's happening in the city. I'm not concerned about, you know, a developer saying, well, I'm going to build 9,900 square feet to avoid coming to visit with the Development Commission, which would hurt our feelings to start with. But because that's just as a decision on how they're going to develop a piece of property, I don't think that's a trigger, a big trigger. I mean, if it's right at the edge, maybe, but unlikely that would be a barrier. The idea of looking at Old Town maybe a little differently, I'd like that idea too as a concept. I didn't think about it. I think that's a good idea, just because it is an important part of the city that really warrants maybe a higher level of public engagement and participation that could happen here when changes do happen. And because I'm just thinking about some of the projects that have come through the Development Commission in Old Town, specifically along Front Street and along Sunset. And there is a high level of interest, and there's a high level of detail that's involved in compatibility, et cetera, and meeting a very specific standard for that part of the city. So I think that's something that the staff and the council and the PPC should consider. The piece about the separation between the technical reviews and the site development and the architectural, I think that makes sense. There's a lot of technical work that goes on with development, and you need to have your engineers, et cetera, that have that expertise in education, really looking at that and making those decisions. My concern there, as I expressed, was confusion for the public, and I like the way Director Dollywall laid out the process and how that engagement would happen. But we do need to make sure that people do know where to engage on different parts of the project, so that when they do come in front of the commission, they're really focused on the piece that's in front of the commission, so that we can help take in that feedback and provide any additional direction to the applicant and the staff, and/or add a condition if we deem that's appropriate. So, but otherwise, I like the direction this is going as far as, you know, standardizing the approach, simplification, and then some clarity about how the different review processes will work. So.
Commissioner Gilbert?
Well, I concur with the previous commissioners, and I like Commissioner Morgan's comment regarding Old Town and having a lower threshold where design review would kick in. I think that makes a lot of sense for Old Town. And I also agree with lowering from 45,000, lowering the limit to 10,000, just to catch a few more projects that would be really significant for Issaquah. Thank you.
Commissioner Price?
Thank you. I agree with the 10,000 square foot threshold. I think that makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons that we've talked about already. I do feel like our volume's going to go up, even though, I don't know, you have evidence to the contrary. My first reaction was our volume's going to go way up. I also think if we're not wading through hundreds and hundreds of pages of reports, potentially we could handle that increased volume. So I think our preparation would probably be reduced. Although I would still like some visibility into those approvals and reports, just to understand the project in its entirety. I think that's helpful. And then, yeah, Commissioner Morgan's idea of reducing the threshold in special circumstances makes a lot of sense, that review now is subject to a community-based review process. And so I would agree with that idea. So that's all I have.
Thanks, and I agree with the 10,000 foot threshold for all the reasons stated. However, I am strongly for including the high-vis street option. I'm not sure if it's all of the streets that we currently have, but I think when this was added to the code, I certainly don't have any memory of when it was, maybe some of you do. I think it showed a lot of foresight, which is really true and clear today, because we have Newport, we have Front, Maple, Gilman are all streets in or bordering central Issaquah, and that's where we expect and encourage much of our future development to go. I think it's especially important that we have full public participation in the process on these streets, because projects already that don't result in a change of land use, I believe, are already exempt. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But I think if the use remains the same in there, I don't think we see them anyway. And I was thinking, for example, without the high visibility street provision, wouldn't that allow a building of 200 by 49 feet on Gilman without any development commission or public hearing? So that's a lot of frontage on which the public would not be able to air their opinions in front of us. So I would be for the 10,000 foot threshold, but also the high visibility streets. And I'm also for the 1 acre threshold as well. So do you have enough consensus, or do we need to vote, or?
I think that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to kind of make sure on the high visibility streets, for you, Commissioner Sanford, you suggesting what threshold for those streets?
I think what we have now, 4,000.
Okay. Is there consensus on that, or we just want to capture, does everyone feel strongly about the high visibility street and or lowering further 10,000 square foot threshold to 4,000 on those streets?
Commissioner Dillon?
I think Chair Sanford mentioned possibly re-looking at those high visibility streets and maybe narrowing that list down, but retaining it for those streets that are really the key thoroughfares where we see the character of Issaquah. I mean, I see the extension of Sunset up onto Squawk. That doesn't seem like somewhere that we need to have a different threshold, but possibly looking at portions of Gilman Boulevard and some of those areas. I don't feel strongly either way, but I would say that if we were to keep it, that maybe reviewing those streets and possibly shortening that list, possibly those areas in the central sub-area, maybe limiting the boundaries of where those streets are defined and part of the threshold.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yeah, I very much appreciate the comments from Chair Sanford, but I guess I would still feel like that most of the streets outside of Old Town, I think I'd feel comfortable with 10,000 feet or over, and partly because I know that the staff is still going to be reviewing a project under 10,000 square feet, and so there's still going to be somebody looking at it, and they won't just be able to build anything. And I think partly is just the economics of building something under 10,000 square feet. The development review process, fitting into those economics, I think can be very difficult to make something work. And so I'm comfortable with limiting it to more of the Old Town streets that I talked about as opposed to high visibility.
Commissioner Brennan?
Yeah, I was just looking at the map more closely as the high visibility streets, and I think a number of the areas really don't warrant that level of oversight, because I think, for one, like for instance, Gilman Boulevard in the central Issaquah area, that's slated for a significant density and redevelopment. We'll see large projects come through there. So most of what's going to happen along Gilman Boulevard will probably land in front of the commission anyway, just because of the economics of property costs and the density that's allowed there. They're going to go big and more significant than there are now. Some of the other streets that are on here, they're really perimeter streets, and/or they've been redeveloped already. I do think, though, that the character of Old Town is unique to the city, and protecting that personality of the city, I think, and that history of the city, I think, is important. And I think that that would warrant this higher level of oversight or engagement with the commission. But the economics, Commissioner Morgan talked about the economics. The economics of development and coming through a process that adds time and uncertainty to your project is a significant deterrent from developers actually coming and investing in the city. So it's always that the policy choice is the balance. What's the appropriate level of oversight, and what are we what's the value that's added to that versus the risk that we're placing on the developers that are trying to develop in the city. And I think that kind of where we're landing now is, I'm comfortable with that, with this kind of focused in the Old Town area, and let staff deal with properties outside that are under that 10,000 threshold.
So to summarize, am I hearing we like the 10,000 foot threshold? We're talking about some high visibility streets, but more constrained to Old Town perhaps. So we're looking at refining the list of high visibility streets really from what we have now. Any other aspects that I'm overlooking here? So is that enough detail, I hope? Okay, great. So I think we can close that question of the meeting and move on to our next regular item tonight, and that's about adopting rules and regulations. Final item on our regular business agenda this evening involves consideration of two potential changes to the Development Commission rules and regs. And these are a change to our start time to 6:30 and adoption of new virtual attendance policy. The order for this item will be staff presentation, then Development Commission questions for staff, and finally, Commission motion, any amendments and votes. So just to be clear, that to separate points 2 and 3, our second point will really be questions only for staff, and then our last one will be a commission motion to initiate the discussion about the item among ourselves. So for staff presentation, can you please proceed? Tonight we have City Clerk Tisha Geiser.
Hi, Commission. It's nice to be here tonight. As the chair said, I'm Tisha Geiser. I'm the city clerk, and I want to take a minute to thank you for your service. I'm currently working on a project helping to archive our old Development Commission records. So I'm looking at commission records back into the 70s from a Board of Adjustment we used to have, and just through time in Issaquah, and it's really been powerful thinking about all of those volunteer hours that were spent in so many night meetings to make our community what it is today. So thank you for being a part of that. It was a pleasure to listen to your discussion tonight. I'm here to talk to you about some proposed amendments to your rules and regulations. As you're very aware, in July of this year, the Development Commission was one of about half of our 13 advisory boards that resumed in-person meetings. And as of last week, all of our advisory boards have had their first in-person meeting. However, most of our boards are committed to continuing to have a virtual element. So for the Development Commission, you are one of the boards where the city would like to continue providing that virtual option for the public to participate, make comments, or observe, as well as staff or consultants, developers who might be presenting to you. But initially, the emphasis was really on you coming and sitting here in these chairs. But over the past few months, we've heard feedback from board members in many of the boards and commissions that would like to retain an option to attend virtually. And so in response to that, the mayor directed the clerk's office to propose sort of a draft policy to offer the commissions. It's very optional. And so we'll go over just the basics of that tonight. It's fairly brief. It was in your packets. Additionally, there was recently some interest expressed by a commissioner about revisiting the start time. The Development Commission, I believe you're the only commission currently who meets at 7 o'clock. Most of our boards and commissions do begin a little earlier, ranging from 5 to 6:30. And because we were bringing forward these amendments, we thought we would just pose that question to you. So let's start with the meeting start time. So this room that we're in is used as a virtual and in-person municipal court during the day. And so there is a fair amount of setup that occurs prior to your meetings. So we would request that as you're considering an earlier start time, that 6:30 would work very well. 6 o'clock or prior could be a little challenging depending on when the court calendar ends. And then let's take a minute to talk about the virtual attendance policy. So the proposed policy would require in-person attendance of a quorum of the commission, and this is for two reasons. One, it's the administration would like to continue to encourage in-person attendance, and we feel that this does that. The other reason is if there are issues with the virtual technology, either by individual members or the city's system, we would need to end the meeting if there was not a quorum in person, which really for anyone who's shown up at the meeting, including the commissioners, could feel less than ideal. So the proposed policy would request that or require that you provide advance notice to your staff liaison, Christian here, of your intention to participate virtually, preferably 5 days in advance, but certainly things could come up closer to the meeting. And then assuming that it was confirmed that a quorum would be in person, you'd have the ability to participate virtually. You would be able to fully participate. There wouldn't be any restrictions on your ability to vote or anything like that. You would be noted in the minutes as present with just a distinction that you attended virtually. But we are hoping that commissioners don't use this option, potential option, to just sort of keep an ear on the meeting. The idea would be that if you were participating virtually, your camera, we'd like you to join by computer if possible. We'd like your camera to be on so that you can be fully engaged. If you are traveling with your family on vacation, if you are not feeling well, we would like you to request an excused absence. But this could be useful if you had a transportation or childcare issue, or we're recovering from a medical procedure, needing to quarantine, a minor cold, something of that nature. And then one limitation would be that if the chair was attending virtually, we would be looking to the vice chair or another commissioner to chair, who was in person, to chair the meeting. So there are some other just really minor tweaks, and of course you are very welcome to offer suggested wording edits or substantive edits to the proposed rules, but we have acknowledged in this draft policy that members of the public can participate virtually and made a few minor adjustments to identify that, as well as staff. And then the proposed rule change does just also acknowledge that your regular meetings will have that virtual component. And I expect that most of your special meetings would too, but if you choose to do something like a tour or have a sort of a semblance of a social gathering, we would probably refrain from a virtual element for those meetings, as it is no longer required in state law. Lastly, the legislature did amend the Open Public Meetings Act during COVID and did allow for fully virtual meetings while there's a declared emergency. So that remains an option. As you have probably heard, the governor's planning to lift the emergency proclamation at the end of this month, but the city's emergency proclamation is still in place. And so here is a proposed motion. Again, you're very welcome to ask questions or offer changes or not adopt this policy. If you would like to compel in-person attendance of the commission, you certainly do not need to make this change, but we are offering it as one option. Thank you.
Thank you. So commissioners, do we have any questions on either the time change or the virtual attendance policy? Commissioner Morgan.
Thank you. I've a question on, this is page 62 of the package. It's item B under number 6. It says, members attending virtually be considered present at the meeting and may participate. However, if an alternate member needs to serve in place of a regular member, the alternate members attending in person will be given preference to serve in the place of regular members. I didn't fully understand the English of that in terms of does it mean, I guess my thought would be what we'd want is if there's an alternate member that's here at the meeting, that they would be, if we're counting 7 voting members, it would be the voting members including alternates as opposed to a regular commission member that's virtual, or?
In lieu of another alternate member that's virtual. So if there were 2 alternate members.
So alternate members attending in person will be given preference to serve in the place of regular members.
And I see the way that's worded, that is not very clear. But the intention, however, I'm going to pull up your rules because you are one of the only boards that specify, or commissions that specify which alternate votes. And I believe it's based on seniority and then
Right.
rotated. So I actually think that we might want to remove this provision which I had thought I had removed from, I had put together a policy to share with all the boards, very aware that your commission was unique in specifying how an alternate is chosen. So it might be, at a minimum, the wording should be changed, I think, to clarify that the expectation is if you're a regular member, you'll be allowed to vote whether you're virtual or in person. But if there are 2 alternates and one is virtual and one is in person, preference would be given to the in-person alternate. However, your commission rules specify, I believe it's the alternate with the seniority is the first alternate to serve, and then it rotates throughout the year. So I would propose that we keep that in place. I did not intend to override that.
So if we had, because I think we have 7 voting people at a time, so if we had, I guess if you had a regular commissioner that was virtual, and you had 6 regular members in person, you wouldn't even call in an alternate to sit in it, because you would just say, we have enough.
That's correct.
Okay. And I guess the question would be, would we prefer to have an alternate member who would attend the meeting to sit in over a regular member who would be serving virtually? And that's, I guess, a question of commissioners, how we would feel about that. Would we give, in essence, preference to somebody that comes to the meeting as opposed to virtual?
And who decides that? Would we? Decide?
Well, that's what I think we would have it probably in here if that was stated that,
Right. Okay.
that if an alternate member can fill the seat of a regular member to get to 7, would you then not offer that virtual option to the regular member?
Yeah.
And Commissioner Morgan, that was something we considered building into this draft policy, but as I visited commissions, I realized that the logistics behind that can be challenging, particularly for some of our larger boards. We have a board that has 4 alternate members, and had a situation with that board where there were 3 regular members that attended virtually, and there was 1 in-person alternate. So how do you navigate that? So it's certainly something the commission could consider if you wanted to further compel or reward that in-person attendance. But I do foresee some challenges with implementing it.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if I'm necessarily for it, but I thought it was an interesting question to ask of, like you say, do you want to incentivize people to show up?
Commissioner Brennan?
Interesting question. I had to read that a few times myself, and I thanks for the explanation. So I think, yeah, a little rewording might be good on that, just to make sure it's clear. The intent's clear. I think when it comes to what your concern is, and then the issues with regard to logistics, and I can see that, and even choosing when we've got multiple alternates and somebody has to sit out, we got into that a few times and saying, ooh, it's uncomfortable. And that's why we put it in the rules, is let's set it up as a rule, and here's how it works. But the way this is set up, it's a fairly narrow allowance for people to be virtual. It's not just, I don't feel like driving in because it's raining and I want to stay home where it's warm. It's not a legitimate reason to go virtual. It needs to be you're ill, or you've got a work-related issue that's keeping you away from town, but you're available, that sort of thing. So I think I'm comfortable with the intent that you described in this particular instance. And the other thing going for us is, well, we have 1 alternate, so it makes it really easy because we know who it's going to be. But anyway, for now anyway. But he's awesome. So anyway.
I had a question, please. Thank you. One question real quick, though. Commissioner Morgan, weren't you on the commission in the 70s? Did you go back to That was a bad
I wore a lot of tie-dye to the meetings.
All right. So I had one clarification, even though it was clearly a clarification point here. The public, going forward, no matter what, can attend virtually, as well as staff. Good. I think that's key. I think, and I've witnessed, and I've heard, that really promotes participation, which I think is what this is really all about. If we peel away all the layers, hopefully we can get more public participation, awareness, or even attendance on some level. I think it can be intimidating. I think it can be inconvenient. I think we can all make excuses, but if it's easy, I think it's great. Beyond that, that was really it. That was my only question. Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Brennan?
Yeah, just one more for clarification. I think I know the answer to this one, but when it talks about staff participation, that staff may participate in the meeting in person or virtually, and it's under the staff participation, it's dealing with expert testimony. So my worry is that if all staff decide to participate virtually and leave us in here all by ourselves, we'll get into mischief, and so we need help. But that is, if we're bringing in one of the city engineers or environmentalists or environmental planners, et cetera, that would be for that purpose, but the staff liaison, others would be here as a regular attendee.
That's exactly right. So your staff liaison or their designee, there will always be someone here to sort of assist you in person. But as you mentioned, there might be multiple staff presentations, and those individuals may choose to participate virtually. We also, as part of this commitment to maintaining this virtual element to your meetings, there is a meeting assistant, Mr. Aldrich there, who will be at your meetings to facilitate the virtual experience for the public and any commissioners who might choose to participate virtually. So we will not leave you alone.
Okay, now I can sleep tonight. Thank you.
Others? Had a couple. Let's see. 4.1, I think it's 4.1C. Conduct each meeting as efficiently as possible to adjourn the meeting no later than 10 p.m. Do the other groups that have an earlier start time have an earlier cutoff, or is this 10 always the cutoff time?
That's a good question. There's a real range. I believe we have some boards that might have a 9 o'clock, but I've also seen an 11 o'clock. So, so I don't know what the typical end time is. I would say 3 hours after your start time.
3 hours after start, yeah.
So
okay.
that could be something you revisit, and that's a very good point.
Maybe we would amend that, yeah. Okay, so let's see what else. I guess it's in, this would be section 7C, down where there are several enumerated points. So the following guidelines are established for public comments. And the first one was, when recognized, commenters are encouraged to use the podium, and that was stricken. And I was wondering why that was stricken.
And I probably could have, that was just to recognize the fact that at this point, we're averaging 50% of the public comments are being made virtually. And so I think we could certainly, it could still be left in and just clarified that that applied to in-person comments. Anyone in the room needs to be mic'd.
Right.
And so it is important that they are somewhere where they can have a microphone in front of them, preferably at the podium. And we could certainly leave that in and just clarify it
Yeah,
was for
for
in-person
in-person
attendees,
only, yeah.
if you'd like.
Yeah. Okay, I think those are all the questions that I had. So I think we need a motion to get going discussion and any amendments on this. Commissioner Gilbert.
I move to amend the Development Commission rules and regulations by adopting amendments to Section 1, regular meetings, Section 7, participation, and a new Section 6, virtual attendance as proposed.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, so it's been made, the motion has been made and seconded that we adopt as proposed. Now we can open the floor to discussion and any possible amendments. So do we have any comments, discussions, debate on this item? Commissioner Dillon.
I would prefer that we keep our start time at 7 o'clock. I can work with a 6:30 start time, but 7 o'clock gives me time to get home from work, to have dinner with my family. 6:30, especially on a rough traffic day, which we now are starting to have again, gets really tight. And I appreciate having that little bit of a buffer. The difference between a 9:30 and 10 o'clock end time to me is not that important.
Okay, and maybe we could stick with the time issue right now. Any other comments on the time issue?
I could go either way.
Yeah, me too, I can go. I don't have a strong preference.
I'm also ambivalent. So I say that we accommodate the commissioners.
But the staff or the memo mentioned that a commissioner had requested that we try to start it a little bit earlier, so I'm not sure where that came from, but if they're on the commission, maybe advocate for that and tell us a little bit about the need.
Going to make me put up my hand, aren't you?
Yeah.
The thinking was that when we were meeting with PPC and we were starting at 6:30 and started a little earlier, wound up a little earlier, it just seemed comfortable to me, and we seemed kind of like the outlier commission to me. So especially with the shortening days and the winter coming up, I thought it might be advantageous to end a little early, especially for people who work, earlier the next day. So that was the thinking behind that.
Mr. Chair, just a personal experience, so I as part of my other job, I attend a lot of night meetings, and they typically start at 6 or 6:30. That seems to be, from a public standpoint, I haven't heard anybody complain about that. I understand we all have personal lives too, and we're trying to balance our commitments to our families as well, so I certainly recognize that. But I don't have a strong preference either way, and getting home and having food is something I try to do too, but sometimes it's right from work to here, so it really depends.
Any other comments, ideas, questions? Boy, we want to have a vote on this one?
Well, I will chime in. I can do either, but I get up pretty early for work, so I'm one of the people that would, if it started earlier, I'd probably be a little happier. If it started earlier, maybe ended earlier, but that depends on workload too, I know, but.
Okay, any other discussion on this before I call for a vote? Okay, vote on the time.
So,
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, just a
Go ahead.
point of order. We have a motion for all of the amendments that are in front of us, and so this would be, some of you have to make a motion to amend the motion if we're going to change this to 7 o'clock. So the motion on the table is at 6:30.
Okay,
Yeah.
Good point, thank you. So do I hear a motion to amend the 6:30 amendment to something else?
I guess I don't have a motion. It sounds like the consensus is more towards 6:30, so I'm willing to step down and rescind that request.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we will vote on the change as the motion when we get there, when we're done with discussing the main motion. Do we have any other discussion or amendments to either parts of this update?
So we did.
Commissioner Brennan.
Thank you. We did have discussion about the language regarding participation of alternates, virtually or in person. And so we're going to need to figure out how, and I don't know if we're going to be able to do this on the fly or not, how we're going to amend that language so that it's a little bit more understandable.
Right.
Can I ask a question about that then? Maybe
Please.
ask Trish, would it be on that verbiage on that says if an alternate member needs to serve in place of a regular member, the alternate members attending in person will be given preference to serve in the place of regular members. If we just add, will be given preference, will be given preference to alternate members not attending in person?
Commissioner, I honestly think because of your competing or conflicting provision in your existing rules, I honestly would suggest that be struck. Just
Take out that second paragraph?
Yes.
Completely? Okay.
That's what I would suggest.
Yeah, because I am hearing the conflict with, I did see
Yeah.
that earlier, that it's the alternate who has served longest on the commission. It will begin with that alternate, selection with that alternate. So whatever we say about alternate being in person or virtually, we would still have a conflict with that overall requirement. So
Yeah.
I understand the reasoning behind striking it.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chair, I would move that we strike paragraph 2 of item 6B.
We have a second.
Second.
Any discussion? Well, it's been moved and seconded then that we strike the section just referred to by Commissioner Morgan. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All
Aye.
opposed, say no. That amendment is adopted then. Any other discussion, amendments, and so on? I have one for Article, I would like to move that Article 4, Section 1C be changed to, every effort will be made to conduct each meeting as efficiently as possible in order to adjourn the meeting no longer than 9:30 p.m. Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Amendment is adopted. Let's see. Any other discussion or amendments? I'd like to propose one. I move to amend Section 7, Participation, C, add the first item as the following guidelines are established for public comments made under general public comments or public hearings, Commenters attending in person must use the lectern.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded that we add the statement, commenters attending in person must use the lectern. Any discussion?
I think we need to be careful with must. We could have people with disabilities that may be a challenge, and so maybe or I guess, I don't know if I can propose alternate language to the amendment.
Sure.
But that attendees in person must provide their comments via microphone.
Other discussion on that? Commissioner Brennan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually like the idea of striking this language because I don't think it's necessary, because just thinking about the way the room works and the way that the public engages here, they need to be, because we are televised, they need to be in front of a microphone, and so they're asked by staff to either, if they're a presenter, to go to the table where they're doing presentations in front of a microphone, or to the podium. And if you have somebody who's in a wheelchair or unable to, move around in the space, we can take a portable microphone to them so that they could speak. So I think we don't have to be that specific in the rules. I think the way we would operate in the room would effectively allow for participation by any member of the public that's in the room that would like to be heard.
Do we have consensus on that? Do people feel that that's generally the way it works, so we don't need the language? I think we have consensus on that. Okay. Yeah, I withdraw that amendment. Okay. I do have one more if anyone else has any other amendments or comments. Okay, the other one I would have is, I guess it's in the same section, Section 7, participation. And it's really the last sentence that's been provided to us tonight. It's under personal attacks, obscene language, and so on, that paragraph. The last sentence reads, all those who would like to indicate support of a stated position may raise their hand or use another method identified by the chair. And that's placed at the end of this discussion. I think it's more appropriate earlier after 7C3 above, so that 7C3 would read, comments shall be limited to 5 minutes or less. All those who would like to indicate support of a stated position may raise their hand or use another method identified by the chair. And commenters are encouraged to avoid repetition by referencing previous commenters with whom they agree.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Smokey. Any other discussion or comments on that? Okay. All in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That amendment is adopted. Do we have any other amendments or discussion on our rules and regs update? Okay, and finally, moving on then. Yes?
Mr. Chair, we still have the main motion?
I'm
Do we
sorry,
need to act on?
yes. So before us, the motion then would become to Development Commission rules and regulations by adopting amendments to Section 1, regular meetings, Section 7, participation, and a new Section 6, virtual attendance as amended. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is adopted unanimously. Thanks. Okay, moving on then to report city council updates. I'd like the staff to provide any updates on city council meetings or activities.
So good evening, commissioners. I think we provided the update on Title 18 for you. Other items, council's busy with the budget discussions now, so a lot of excitement there. Parks Department has a plan for this area and using some of the funds that council considered. connecting the Veterans Park to the Front Street, so some really exciting projects happening there that some of you may care about more to learn about. The other thing that you probably also care about is, as we were going through the Title 18 project, we called it a whiteboard list, items that were outside the scope but were needing some attention at some point. So we've had those discussions with the council committee, and through the budget process, items that were prioritized were included in the funding for the next 2 years. And some of them include parking analysis, more, we did what we did with this Title 18 update, but a more really looking at the data on the ground to make some of those recommendations. So that's one item. The other one is housing diversity, including more diverse housing is one of our adopted strategies. But what does that mean, and what can we do? So that item. And then stream buffers, doing a more in-depth analysis on the grounds of what's the state of affairs for the streams. So those were the 3 items that the council prioritized from the whiteboard for the next 2 years, in addition to the comp plan and the transit study that we're undertaking. So other than that, we had a good discussion with the council committee. It's been on the city's work program for a contractor code of conduct, so you might hear about that. I think you heard from the public commenter today about the role of Development Commission for some of those construction impacts and things like that. But that has been on the city's work program for a few years. We had a good discussion with the council committee of coming up with, 4 broad theme areas: noise impacts and, outwardly facing towards the community. So above and beyond the noise impacts, what are some of the things that can be done? Keeping your site nice and clean, where you put your portable potties, to where you have your workers park, and the impact on the streets and things of that nature. And really notification to the community members when the projects are under construction. And public safety. So those are the 4 broad themes that we're working on. The committee asked us to have a community meeting, so we're trying to schedule that sometime next month. And then committee will take over that topic again at the beginning of the next year. So that's all I have in terms of reports.
That sounds great. That addresses some of the concerns and issues that we've heard about contractors here in our meetings. Yeah, sounds good. Okay, are there any other items of business or announcements from staff tonight? There being no further business before the commission, this meeting is adjourned at 8:33 p.m. Thank you.